Well, we had a little intro hiccup there. This is not Midweek with Max. This is Built on Hemi, the show where we join our partners and delve into the greater ecosystem of crypto and how they interface with it, as well as what they've done with Hemi. My name is Jeremy Nation. I'm Director of Marketing here at Hemi. I'm joined today by Dylan Hansen, Head of Business Development at DIA, the trustless Oracle network whose pitch is to price any asset at any feed, or to verify every feed and price every asset. DIA is now live across 80 plus chains, and in February they shipped a fair value pricing for hemiBTC using a reserve backing methodology instead of just reading a market price off of DEX. Now, before we get into crypto and everything, Dylan, can you give us a little bit about your background and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks for having me on. Yes, so a bit about myself. I'm Dylan Hansen. I'm born and raised in New York City. Here now, you can see my painting here in the back, or my photo there. That's my representation. And a bit about my journey. I suppose it was started when I was in university, 2017. Had been hearing, the rumblings of Bitcoin and crypto. And one day, it was actually, I feel like it's always kind of towards the end of a bull market when people like start to notice price action and when we draw in new attention. And this was exactly my case. I saw, everybody started talking about Bitcoin. I looked it up. A couple seconds later, I refreshed the page. It had already moved a couple $100s. And I was like, whoa, like I've never seen volatility in an asset class like this. A couple years prior, I was even, fascinated by penny stocks because of the volatility. I'm a high risk tolerance kind of like, I'm excited by high vol assets and high upside asymmetric return assets. And so Bitcoin definitely drew my attention. And that was the starting point. I started to, do a little bit more research into it and the crypto asset class itself, and realized it was backed by, fundamentally innovative technology. And that this is not just some, high vol asset that's just pure speculation, but that this is actually new tech that has real implications about how it can change our financial system. And that was the beginning. I spent the summer actually in Berlin in a program that educated us on the fundamentals of Bitcoin and Solidity for Ethereum programming. And went back to college, went back to normal life. And 2020 came around, COVID crash, was looking all around the market, had different opportunities. Crypto obviously, had a major collapse. And I thought that this was a beautiful time to go deep. I thought, this is what crypto is made for. They're printing and injecting money, the Fed's lowering rates and they're putting stimulus into the market. This is going to go into hard assets. And so went deeper, continued investing. I did, I was working in private wealth for 10 months after university. And I decided, let me take the risk, the leap of faith here. I quit my job. I moved to Puerto Rico and I joined a crypto team there, a smaller crypto team in the Polkadot ecosystem. 9 months after that, I decided it was time to level up my career within the crypto space, join a more legitimate team and something that I found real trajectory behind the product. And that's what led me to DIA. And so I've been with DIA now for about 4 years. And yeah, it's been a very exciting journey.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, a lot of times people think about crypto and volatility and it's a deterrent, but for you, it was kind of like a moth to a flame. Now, Oracle's is about as deep an infrastructure layer as you can get. A lot of people get attracted to things like trading and the price action there. How did you land on the plumbing rather than the shiny stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question. So again, it goes back to the fact that really my passion for investing brought me into the space. And so when I joined this smaller team as my first, job within the crypto space, it was in one ecosystem and it was a very specific use case within one ecosystem. And I was a little bit pigeonholed as it relates to, what I was learning, what I was onboarding and where I was spending my focus. And so during that time, I missed Solana, I missed Avalanche, I missed a lot of the other things that were happening and which were exciting in the space. And so when I was looking, also part of my consideration for joining a new team was something that was a little bit more spread in its focus. Trying to pinpoint the wording on this, but something that which was more agnostic with its application. And so DIA and infrastructure alone is perfect for this. This is part of what I love about working at DIA. It's, we focus on every new network. Every new network is relevant. All different types of DeFi use cases are relevant, whether it's real world assets, stablecoins, lending and borrowing, perpetual DEXs. It's very widespread in its focus. And so the plumbing, while it's not like, perceived as this super, let's say like exciting thing initially, I think the scope of where you're spending your time when you're on the plumbing side is very exciting. And the relationships that we can have in supporting all of the different applications within those categories. So that's kind of how I got deeper into my career as a plumber here.
Now, from where you sit now, what's a common misconception people have about verifiability and crypto pricing?
Yeah, I think that verifiability is extremely important. Oracles are the backbone of DeFi in many ways. They're integral to a protocol, and they secure the TVL that a protocol has. And so verifiability is extremely important. Web3 itself is built with the ethos of decentralization and with the ethos of open source smart contracts and development. And so for an Oracle, our belief at DIA is that it's essential that an Oracle is verifiable. But the misconception, I would say, is that many people, at least I believe that people perceive that this is the case all around the space as it relates to oracles. And as you go deeper under the hood here, you realize it's not, that many oracles do have black boxes. And what I mean by black boxes is that they might have closed source smart contracts or off-chain components that can't actually be verified on-chain. And so what our design ethos is that the developers who are consuming this feed, or even the users who are using, a market on a specific lending protocol that's backed by the Oracle feed, they should be able to audit the flow, audit the Oracle end to end, their own. This should be completely open source and verifiable. And so, yeah, the misconception, I think, is that this is, applied all around the space, but I think it's certainly not.
And approaching them like on-chain price feeds, they seem pretty dead simple. I mean, you find the price, you put it on chain, but like that model can start to fracture. Where does it require a more robust approach?
I think this is also a misconception in that in theory, yes, it is very simple. The use case, you're getting data, you're getting a price feed, you're getting a NAV calculation, you're getting off-chain, you're getting some data, and you're pushing it on chain. But in production, the architecture is required that it's extremely robust. You're not just getting it from one source, right? Think of how many different exchanges there are in the crypto space. So one is now you're sourcing data from multiple different sources, right? DIA actually supports over 100 different centralized and decentralized exchanges as primary data sources. And so now, one, you're looking at not just the markets, but the underlying pools and the liquidity within each of these pools across all of the sources for a specific price feed. And then the architecture itself requires redundancy, right? You need multiple RPC providers. You need a whole decentralized setup of node operators who are pushing the price feeds. You need, a completely robust monitoring and QA setup. It's, in theory, it's simple. We've seen teams try to build out their own Oracle infrastructure, but in practice, this is, a vulnerability if it's not done in an entirely robust way. And so, yeah, I mean, zooming back out here, I'm trying to think at where I got lost there, but there's a whole setup and architecture that's required in order to actually ensure that price feeds are pushed correctly and accurately. And you can't really I think most teams who think that they can just do this in-house, one, you're allocating now a ton of dev resources into something that's not going to be set up in the correct way that a team who specializes within this area are going to support you with. And so, in practice, it requires an extremely comprehensive architecture.
Now, in terms of computing value, you guys use a term, intrinsic fair value. And what does that mean and how is it computed?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Thank you for this. So we see now that the space has evolved. One of the things I love about oracles is that as the space changes and there's new use cases, there's new applications for oracles. And so today we see tons of real world assets, for example, being brought on chain. You know, a lot of us believe that the scope of what can be tokenized and brought on chain is theoretically anything. Now, we've always known that there's a liquidity fragmentation issue in crypto. And so for us to tokenize everything, you want to tokenize an asset and bring it on chain, you're not going to be able to do this with, you know, millions of dollars of liquidity for each of these assets that are being tokenized in order to create a true, robust market-based price feed for this asset. What I mean by market-based is you're, again, using these exchanges as the source of price. You're aggregating data, trades from these exchanges and creating a market-based price feed based on these trades. But yeah, again, zooming out, the liquidity is not robust enough for many of these new assets that are being tokenized and brought on chain. And so intrinsic fair value suggests or refers to what is the actual underlying value for, let's say, a collateral backed asset, right? Not what is it trading at on Uniswap, but what is it actually backed by? Real world assets are backed by actual assets. If you're tokenizing, let's even say, we can probably go into the hemiBTC example as well, not an RWA, but also applicable here, of course. But yeah, let's say that you are tokenizing a fiat currency. Well, you're going to have to actually hold the fiat currency as a collateral for the supply that's minted on chain. And so a fundamental feed or a fair value methodology looks at what is the actual value of the fiat that's collateralizing the amount of minted supply on chain, rather than and again, getting outside of the limitations of a market-based price feed for these, which might, in cases where there's limited liquidity, is not accessible because it wouldn't create a robust enough price feed to ship in production.
Now, there's a whole class of assets that are concurrently supporting Bitcoin and DeFi that barely existed 2 years ago. From DI's perspective, what is your understanding about pricing Bitcoin back collateral that gives you better insight into today's market formations?
Yeah, we've always been pretty firm believers in the BTC-Fi space from the early days. I mean, it just makes sense, right? Like Bitcoin is the most liquid asset. It's the highest market cap, highest valuation asset in the space. People want to use it in DeFi. People want to borrow against it, lend against it, use it for more capital efficient use cases on chain. And so this entirely makes sense. And in the early days, when we saw a real growth within this category, we saw a bunch of different L2s or side chains or, EVM compatible BTC-Fi networks. We went really deep into these and did a lot of partnerships on these. And through the, integration stages with those teams and through our, the due diligence we've had on this over the years, we've become quite familiar with how to work with, Bitcoin Core, and even like Litecoin Core and other Bitcoin related and especially like in this case like non-EVM, non-standard architectures. So this is definitely an area we've spent a lot of time doing due diligence and becoming, specializing in. I think this continues to be a great opportunity, and I think it's still untapped, like in its most in its highest potential. There's so much unused Bitcoin that people are looking for usage or accessibility over how to have more capital efficiency on it. So yeah, this is the one thing is the backing that in the familiarity we have with the BTC-Fi space. The other thing here is now getting back again to what you mentioned on intrinsic value, and when I like to refer to it as fundamental value. It's the same thing, but it's a little bit easier, rolls off the tongue better. It makes a little bit more sense. So yeah, as it relates to this, we've also gone super deep into methodologies for pricing illiquid or thinly traded assets. And this is where hemiBTC became not suggesting that it's illiquid or thinly traded, but it became a great candidate for this because of its nature in being backed by Bitcoin as collateral. And so we can maybe take it from there, but that's the.
Well, I mean, And you kind of touched on like the greater accessibility of Bitcoin is made possible by being able to see the collateralization of it and verify that. And when you talk about that, I mean, you know, for instance, maybe we can dig a little deeper into that. How does DIA actually verify, you know, hemiBTC's collateral?
Mm-hmm. So very similar to the use case I mentioned with the FX price feeds that are backing a stablecoin, for example. So hemiBTC is backed by Bitcoin. It's collateralized by Bitcoin, which is held across 3 different custodian wallets and on Bitcoin's core chain. And so again, what we're doing here is we're reading the value of Bitcoin stored within these wallets on chain. So this is great. You're not having any trusted middlemen. There's no trust assumptions here. This is on chain, which you can now read the total value of the total supply of Bitcoin that's backing hemiBTC. So we're querying these different wallets for the total value of the Bitcoin that's backing hemiBTC. And if you divide total supply of Bitcoin by total supply of Hemi, you can get to a fair value feed for this. You can get to the fair value of hemiBTC. How much is it actually backed by Bitcoin? What I like about this is now, you know, you go into the redeemability of an asset, right? If you want to sell hemiBTC or redeem it for, and if you want to redeem any asset for its underlying collateral, this specific methodology for pricing the asset is perfect. Right, you're actually getting the value for which you can redeem an asset within this methodology.
Now, I want to touch on Lumina. It's your roll-up enabled Oracle infrastructure. How does that fit in, and what is running feeds on Lumina let you do that you couldn't do before?
So Lumina is the roll-up based architecture, DIA's roll-up based architecture. So it's a layer 2. And the design ethos of Lumina, again, is that now everything can be done on chain. In 2020, in the early days of the pre-rollup, the pre-L2 days, most smart contracts, most applications needed to be built on the L1. And this was especially back in the earlier days, like very costly and very slow. But with rollups, now you can have much more cost efficiency, lower costs, and much higher throughput, much lower latency here. And so this is exactly what Lumina creates. Lumina is a completely, it's a layer 2 architecture on which the entire flow of data from node operators sourcing and pushing the data on chain all the way to delivery is on chain with open source smart contracts. So again, Lumina relates back to this first thing I mentioned about this design ethos for verifiability. Lumina is what enables this. It's the architecture. I missed the second part of that question, which is how. Yeah, can you recap the second one?
Yeah, what does it let you do that you couldn't before?
Yeah, so that's precisely it. Now everything can be done on chain. Smart contracts can be open sourced and open source and auditable end to end. And yeah, happy to go a little bit deeper into how Lumina works under the hood if it's of interest. Maybe you should just do this now then. So Lumina, basically what happens is, as mentioned, one of the things about DIA that's kind of distinctive here is the way that DIA sources its data. If you look at the traditional Oracle architecture that's used by majority of Oracle providers, data is exclusively and really primarily sourced by off-chain third-party data providers. So these are centralized premium data providers like Kaiko, 12 Data, Amber Data, et cetera, that pre-aggregate data off-chain before submitting it to the nodes of a given Oracle. Can be robust, can be decentralized, but lack of transparency. By the time the data is pushed on chain, you don't know if it's coming from Binance, Kraken, KuCoin, Uniswap, SushiSwap, Curve, et cetera. And so again, this is now DIA's design ethos to, again, provide verifiability here, is that we scrape data directly from the first party sources themselves. Instead of only, exclusively depending on the middlemen, we go directly to the Binances, the Uniswaps, the first party data sources. And so what happens now as relates to Lumina is there's a decentralized set of node operators that are running Docker containers that are essentially in real time fetching all of the individual trade data, not pre-aggregated, but the individual trades from all of the different supported sources and pushing it directly onto Lumina. And from there, there's a series of smart contracts. So one that's storing the data in real time that the nodes are pushing, so that the next smart contract, the aggregator smart contract, can medianize the data, find the median price point, exclude outliers and anomalies. And basically, this is the whole kind of quality assurance stage of the pipeline. Before it's pushed on chain, there's one final smart contract called the Guardian, which essentially is a benchmark smart contract, which compares the price reported by Lumina to now, nonetheless, an external source. So this is now saying, okay, this is one more final quality assurance check that the price reported by Lumina is in alignment with different industry sources that are actually providing the same price feed within a similar range of accuracy or confidence interval. And then it's pushed to the destination chain using an open source framework of Hyperlane's ISM module. Hyperlane is a cross-chain messaging protocol, which we've worked with directly to design the messaging component of Lumina, how data is being pushed from Lumina to Hemi, or to the destination network. So that's Lumina in a nutshell there.
Oh, that's quite an interesting nutshell you've got there. It's a web of smart contracts, and then checked by a gatekeeper, almost like a diligent student checking its work to make sure that everything is right before it gets sent off to destination chains. Now, with all of this, who's DIA actually for? When you have investor or partnership conversations that are going well, when you're out in the conference circuit and you're connecting with developers, who do you think benefits the most from what you guys are building?
I wouldn't like to pinpoint one person or one specific type of person, because for me, again, this is what's exciting about oracles, is that they relate to so many different types of protocols. So whether it's a chain that wants to support the development and the building of applications on their network, they're excited about DIA, because DIA is not just providing this verifiable pipeline, but we focus on providing very customizable price feeds. The data that we're taking in, as I mentioned, is not pre-aggregated off-chain trade data. It's very granular individual trade data. So this allows us to deploy much more customizable price methodologies, whether it's, let's say, like aggregation methodologies, like a time-weighted average price or volume-weighted average price. It allows us to customize different trade aggregation windows, so on and so forth. And then I'll say one last thing here before I get back to your direct question, if I may, which is that because the data is coming from these first-party data sources, specifically decentralized exchanges, this for me is what's the most exciting part, because all of the majority of the new innovative, exciting assets that have good liquidity on chain are on the DEX. If I'm a protocol in an ecosystem, I'm launching my token most likely on the native DEX in an ecosystem. If I'm a stablecoin, most stablecoins are on the DEX. If I'm a meme coin, an ecosystem native asset, something like this. Since DIA is the oracle that's scraping DEXs as the primary data source, we have the broadest, most comprehensive coverage over these assets. And so this allows us to support more assets than our peers. And so this is what's exciting. A lot of the teams are like, hey, yeah, we're an ecosystem native price feed on Hemi or on a certain network. We need an oracle for this, but it's only trading on this given DEX or these two given DEXs across these pools within the ecosystem. As long as the liquidity and volume are robust enough, we can integrate that DEX as a data source and support that team. And so this applies now more broadly to lending protocols, stables, RWAs, vaults, perp DEXs, and so on and so forth. So it's exciting going to conferences because, again, we're not pigeonholed here. Most of the use cases the teams are building are exciting for us.
And it's easy to understand how, with such wide applications for the protocol, that you have so many interfaces that are beneficial to so many use cases and are creating so many opportunities for individuals to iterate and build on the foundation of price feeds that you guys provide. Given that every team has a part of the stack that they're most proud of, when it comes to your security, reliability, transparency, the source to chain auditability, verification layer, whatever piece it might be, what's the most confident thing that you're happy to put your name behind?
Put my name behind. I hate to sound like I'm, just repeating myself here, but the most confident thing to put my name behind is the verifiability. This is the passion that we're building with across the DIA team. This is like what we're fighting for, like this is what's exciting to push for. We're pushing for an ethos that we believe aligns with the Web3 ethos. And I think that a lot of our partners and teams that we're speaking with are really excited about this and to push on this ethos with us. Teams that are building with the similar ethos, it's exciting to build alongside them. We're fighting for the same thing here. So that's what I'm definitely most confident to put my name behind, is that the price feeds are verifiable, and this should be like ubiquitous across the industry. It's not. The other thing I'll say though that I'm most confident about as it relates to when I'm chatting with the team and finding the synergy, you can't just go to the team and say, yeah, we're only verifiable. You need to actually have unique product strengths that fit their needs as well. And so as it relates to that specifically, the thing I'm the most confident about is, again, the fact that we support more assets than our peers, the fact that we're unlocking the capability for DeFi for more assets than any other Oracle. This is what's exciting. This is, really helping teams to build. We're helping teams get off the ground, even if it's an asset that's, on one given chain, but they want to create a bridge to Hemi and enable, lending on Hemi for this asset. They can be supported now, because we're able to support them by scraping the data from from Uniswap and from another exchange on Ethereum, and have a price feed for this, and then provide this across chain to Hemi. So now you're actually creating more. You're improving the cross-chain capabilities of an asset that was once isolated without any use case beyond the native protocol. So these are the things that I get the most excited about.
And, I'm glad that you mentioned the verifiability as a component there, because when you look at the Oracle space and the entire ecosystem that interfaces with it, a lot of the risk that's associated with oracles is this lack of verifiability. And when an oracle is exploited or something along those lines, and a price feed is, tampered with, it creates a lot of these surface areas for attack vectors. So verifiability and DIA working hand in hand together, and it raises the bar, I think, for how people should be approaching price feeds on a general basis. Now, of all the chains that DIA could prioritize, and you guys aren't on 80 plus, why was Hemi worth a custom Bitcoin collateral integration?
One, because hemiBTC itself is a great candidate for fundamental feeds, which is what we believe is supporting the next era of assets that are being brought on chain. Two, we believe in BTC-Fi. And so this was great. This was like, DIA can unlock this use case for lending, borrowing, and for different DeFi applications on Hemi that's currently blocked. And then outside of that, and outside of the belief in Hemi itself as an ecosystem and the BTC-Fi narrative, it also comes down to who you know. And I was chatting with the Hemi team across a couple of different conferences, and we always got along very well. Shout out to Ram. And I love just like sitting there listening to Ram like share all of his stories from his experiences across the space. And so when he came to us and said, we're blocked on this, we need a solution, it just really made sense. It was pretty much a no-brainer for us to formalize an actual collaboration with you guys, a partnership here, and make it work out. So yeah, it's been really fruitful ever since.
And tokens like hemiBTC are almost like a textbook case for reserve-backed pricing.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, because again, this is a collateral-backed assets. It's backed by Bitcoin directly. This is the use case. hemiBTC should be tracking the value of Bitcoin, and the redeemability of it should be one-to-one with that of its Bitcoin backing. And so this makes absolute sense. And it was also blocked in these earlier stages on the liquidity and volume side. And so the problem is when you have low liquidity for an asset, or lower liquidity than ideal, or lower volume for an asset than ideal. This was, again, a couple quarters ago. What happens is now market buys and sell orders can easily move a price. In fact, somebody can way more easily manipulate the value of a feed in this case. And so this is where oracles historically you look at like the cases in which oracles have had mispricings or bad events over the history. This is the vast majority of them, is that, it comes directly from the source. It's not actually the oracle itself being exploited or the contracts. It's the fact that the oracle was dependent on a data source for that, which was not high quality, which had low volume and low liquidity. And so this made absolute sense to ship a fundamental feed here, and unlock the hemiBTC use cases. And so what I wanted to actually go to on that point, I just remembered, is that when there's low liquidity or lower volume on an asset than ideal, somebody can make a big trade and exploit it or take advantage of it on the lending protocol or on the DeFi side. And this also leads to reflexive liquidations that shouldn't happen. Just because somebody bought an asset in one block and then it jumped up, and then the next block it resumed back to its, where it was trending at in the line, you don't want to liquidate your users over this. So these fundamental feeds that are more I guess fundamentally sound in their pricing approach really help to prevent these reflexive unnecessary liquidations across these markets as well.
And we've certainly seen those on like Kraken, for instance. In 2017, one of the first stories I ever covered was the massive flash liquidation of a bunch of long positions during a couple blocks of price action that ultimately did not reflect the true market valuation of the assets underlying.
Crazy. You can see 100%, like sometimes in the middle of the night on like a Saturday when the markets are very thin, you'll see exactly like the Binance order book dip, or I don't want to some centralized exchanges, but Binance is like one of the highest volume exchange, right? So even if it can happen to them, you'll see it flash crash and then revert back instantly. You don't want these low volume market impacts to liquidate all your users. 100%.
And in light of like volatility in markets and everything like that, let's talk about X value and reserve backing methodology specifically. How does X value compute a price, and what are the inputs that you guys aggregate on that a pure market oracle simply isn't looking at?
Yeah, so I recommend anybody who's actually interested in checking this out, looking into the methodologies, I would refer you to the docs on this. I'm sorry to do this, but if you go to the DIA docs under the fundamental feed section, you'll see that there's actually a whole set of different methodologies because it depends on the use case. So for example, this was actually designed initially during the whole liquid staked token, the whole LST explosion. We saw, I think, what was this, like 2022, early 2023? LSTs were like the driving narrative in the market. It was a bear market. Coming out of the bear market, people wanted more capital efficiency on their holdings. I want to deposit my asset, my ETH, and I want to get staked ETH out of it so that I can earn yield on that and then have more DeFi utility on staked ETH. Staked ETH was fairly well traded, had enough liquidity for a market-based price feed. But a lot of these LSTs did not. A standard LST and a not on Ethereum and another ecosystem might and likely did not have enough volume and liquidity for a robust market-based price feed. So again, this is the origination of fundamental feeds. What you can do here is you can perform a contract exchange rate methodology. What this looks at is, we know the base asset is ETH, or we know the base asset is some asset, Hemi, for example, right? Because this applies here. Very similar use case. And then you can look at what the receipt token is. So what the deposit is ETH. The receipt token is staked ETH. And you can do a contract exchange rate methodology to look at to what extent is staked ETH collateralized by actual Ethereum in the smart contract. If it's 1-to-1, the value of staked ETH is tracking that of ETH. The redeemability of it is the value of how much Ethereum is being held here. If it's 90% collateralized, the redeemability of staked ETH is 90 cents on the dollar of how much ETH is backing it. Thus, fundamental feeds make sense in a market where there's limited liquidity and limited volume. And so this is where it started. And then it really expanded over the years because now, the big growth vertical in many cases is proof of reserves. This requires a different methodology. So we have contract exchange rates. Exactly. This is why I referred you guys to the docs, because there's a whole methodology suite depending on the different use cases, which I think are pretty exciting. So I want to pull this up just so I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we have contract exchange rate, reserve backing, redemption capped valuation, NAV, net asset value. That's definitely one of the highest demand ones lately, especially for vaults. Redemption value, and then proof of reserves. So yeah, within the docs shares the underlying methodologies for each of these approaches.
Now, going back to hemiBTC, its value to a holder is being able to take Bitcoin and put it to work across a DeFi ecosystem on Hemi, right? And those opportunities extend to a lot of different things: lending, stablecoins, yield, but all without losing the backing of BTC underlying it. And none of that really works without the price protocol. Now, from DIA's side, what does, say, like a lending market on Hemi actually get the moment that your hemiBTC feed goes live that it didn't have before?
So they get a live smart contract on Hemi. This is the Oracle smart contract that's providing updates on the price of hemiBTC. It sounds pretty simple. And in accessing it for developers, it's pretty simply a get value function that they're calling from the smart contract. They receive the value of hemiBTC from the latest timestamp. I believe on Hemi, it's in 8 decimals, and the decimal range is actually customizable, again, because different protocols have different preferences on how many decimals are included in the update. So this is what they're getting in real time. And as it relates to the lending protocol, now they have the source of Hemi, for which users the price of hemiBTC, for which users are lending or are borrowing against it. So once this is live, it unblocks them on enabling lending for this asset within their market.
Now, does embedding, I mean, Hemi takes a different approach to blockchains and many other change. Does embedding the Bitcoin straight directly in the EVM through proof of proof change anything on your end and how you verify, or is your layer like agnostic to all that?
Yeah, so what is relevant, I think, here is the fact that the Bitcoin reserves for hemiBTC are held on Bitcoin Core Chain. So that's the non EVM part of the integration for us, is actually sourcing this from the wallets on Bitcoin, the value of how much Bitcoin is being held to back the asset. But other than that, now the nodes on Dia's network are running the Docker containers that are fetching the value of Bitcoin held in these wallets in real time. And from there, the methodology is pretty straightforward, as it would be on any other EVM chain. So yeah, you're calculating the total supply of Bitcoin held divided by the total amount of hemiBTC minted to get, again, this collateral-based price feed. And then you're able to push it onto Hemi. What's great about, again, is that no, we weren't blocked on this at all, because Hemi, allows developers to ship under a very similar EVM-esque Solidity deployment framework. So this was no blocker for us. No.
Now, for someone who might be developing on Hemi right now, who's wants to get a DIA pricing feed for their asset, what's their path? How fast can you guys set up a custom feed, and what do you need from these guys?
So a custom feed is typically about 1.5 to 2 weeks. What teams could do is they come to us, they share the list of assets they need. Each asset goes through an independent quality assurance review. So we're looking at what are the sources for these assets, how high quality are the sources, what are the underlying markets, the underlying liquidity for each asset, is the liquidity balanced? And then once we actually add the markets and have data being collected for these, it undergoes at minimum a 1.5 week data collection and testing phase to ensure that the price feed is being pushed and delivered with no anomalies, or that it's being delivered as expected. From there, the deployment is a couple days, 1 to 3 days. So typically I like to give a buffer of, a 1.5 to 2 weeks. And that's, about our standard pipeline. And so for teams that would like to get in touch or request this, you can check out the Hemi docs under the Oracle section. I believe there should be a way to get in touch directly with Dia. You could do this through the Dia docs as well, or through diadata.org. We like to work with teams hands-on because of how customizable the oracles are in their nature, and how many teams benefit from this. So we design, and ensure that the parameters align with what they need. But otherwise, if you guys, want to just drop a message, I need this, typically the best route is either Discord or Telegram. And there's a support chat bot that goes directly to all of us on the team, on the BD marketing and tech team, that we will be able to support you with a quick response on that. So yeah, getting in touch with us and then sharing the list of assets you are in need of, typically the best approach.
Highly configurable, widely applicable. Very good.
That's the
Now,
goal.
for the next 3 years, if BTC-Fi grows the way that bulls think it will, never mind this little bearish tinge we're in right now, what do you think what do you think the Oracle layer will look like for Bitcoin-backed assets in like 2029?
Well, I do expect it to grow. You look at how institutions are increasingly expressing interest and showing it to have more engagement with our industry. And what are the assets that institutions have proven that they're the most confident in? It's Bitcoin. And so these BTC-Fi applications are going to be primarily driven in TVL by institutions, I believe, and whales. And what do they require? They require verifiability. I mean, I'm not just like saying this. Maybe this is because I'm breathing this every day, but it makes sense. You're not going to want to just come. Web3, is this like cyberpunk ethos, and in the early days, like a lot of developers were, I guess, like got used to accepting black boxes as just a standard here, or that this is just the nature of the industry and that this is okay. But new entrants into the industry are coming in with a new, fresh set of eyes. And they're going to want to absolutely verify that what they are relying on is audited by their own systems, and that they've actually done a proper due diligence on this. And in order to actually do the proper due diligence, you need this on-chain open source verifiability component. So I think that we are pretty well positioned at DIA to support this kind of this narrative, and especially as the institutions come on chain and with more rigid requirements on the infra that they're using.
Now, for anyone who's new to oracles or any of the things that we've covered here, what's one thing you might want them to walk away from this conversation and take away with them?
So oracles seemingly complex, but if we zoom out, oracles are just the connector between smart contracts and the off-chain world, and the on-chain world. Smart contracts are kind of inherently isolated within themselves, right? A lending borrowing protocol can facilitate the lending and borrowing of an asset, but they don't externally access the price of that asset or the collateral that's backing that asset unless if they build this out themselves natively. And so the oracle is really simply put the connector of smart contracts and data that exists outside of the smart contracts. And it's just exciting to get deeper into, because once you go deeper into oracles, again, you start to understand more about how DeFi works. You can make better educated decisions into whatever it is that you're doing, and you can also start to be more up to date with what the new narratives are, what people are doing that's exciting these days, and what's possible to be built. Oracles are either going to enable you to build something or bottleneck you to build something. And so understanding that fundamental primitive of a DeFi application in the Oracle side is a pretty good learning curve that I suggest people to take a look at.
Well, with this widely ranging conversation, is there anything that we didn't touch on you'd like to add?
Yeah, maybe there's one of the, I guess that's pretty much it. There's oracles also, I'll say this, is that it's not just price feeds, but oracles, again, are doing proof of reserves, but oracles also provide verifiable randomness. So if you look into like gaming or on-chain casinos or gambling, these types of applications, they actually need randomness. If every time you go to the game and you open the chest, it gives you the same exact output, it's not a fun game. And so, or if every time you do the slot or something, it does the same output, it's not effective. And so there's other details. Again, this is just like external data, external functions. This is the role that the Oracle really supports smart contracts with. But other than that, I don't know, Jeremy, I'd ask you, like, what's going on? What's going on your end? What are you excited about?
I wish I could tease what we've got cooking over here at Hemi, but let's just save that for another date.
Perfect.
Dylan, thank you so much for joining me today. Dia is doing a lot of great stuff in the Oracle space. Guys, if you're out there in the audience, want to check out what they're doing, check them out at diadata_org on Twitter here. You can check them out online, www.diadata.org. And thanks again, Dylan. And I hope that everyone who joined us today has a wonderful day, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you. And to the Hemi team. Great to chat.
All right.